We begin with events in Gaza. Thousands of people starting to leave the eastern suburbs of Rafah in the south of Gaza. Remember, these are people, more than 1 million people, more than half the population, many displaced a number of times. In the early hours of this morning, the Israeli Air Force dropped leaflets in the east of the city telling people to move more north to Khan Yunis, to Al-Mawasi as well. Other areas, because the IDF said there will be a limited scope operation. About 100,000 people are expected to be affected. Let's get a sense of what's been going on.
Packed into cars and carts, families are fleeing Rafah after Israel's military airdropped leaflets telling people to evacuate immediately. Many have already fled Israel's offensive several times.
We fled death and destruction to seek safety in Rafah, only to find the same thing here.
The IDF called on residents in the city's eastern zone to move to the expanded humanitarian area at Al-Mawasi on Gaza's nearby coast. This as columns of smoke rose over Gaza, following reported airstrikes in eastern Rafah. Overnight, Israeli strikes in Rafah reportedly killed at least 19 people. This baby, born at the start of the war and orphaned soon after by an Israeli strike, was among the dead.
What has he done to deserve this?
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Israel had yet to present a credible plan to protect civilians, and without it, Washington would not support an offensive on Rafah. Speaking in Jerusalem at a Holocaust Memorial Day ceremony, Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel would not be deterred.
Even if Israel is forced to stand alone, we will stand alone, and we will continue to strike our enemies powerfully until victory.
It comes as attempts at a ceasefire deal and release of hostages have stalled in Cairo. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told his US counterpart on Sunday that military action is required in Rafah after a lack of progress in these talks.
A line from the UN agency UNICEF saying, quote, 600,000 children face catastrophe in Rafah. Let's bring in James Elder from the organisation. James has been working extensively in Gaza through the conflict. He's now in Geneva. Thank you for talking to us, James. Let's start off with your experience of what's going on right now and what you make of the evacuation plan that Israel seems to be advising people to do, to Al-Mawasi, to Khan Yunis too.
Yeah, it's everything that everyone feared, Gavin, that everyone warned about, seems to be happening. These are people who are, as you said in your show, they've moved so many times, they're exhausted, they've had their coping capacities absolutely smashed. When you look at those children in Rafah, I've sat in tents with children in Rafah who've had amputations, who should be in hospital, but the hospitals are overcrowded, are overflowing with children with the wounds of war, so they have to have this turnover. So the idea that they can now suddenly up and leave again to another area, remembering Mawasi, Al-Mawasi, the area you talk of, there's a reason why no one really lived there until a few months ago. This is sand. This is the only place where you can't build and you can't grow anything. So people in Rafah, who were 3,500 people to a shower, 3,500 to one shower, all-day queues for the elderly, for a teenage girl, they are going to an area with even less. So this idea they're going to a humanitarian zone, as it's been called, it makes no sense. We are humanitarians and we have not set up these zones. So they're leaving places often under fire. They are exhausted. They don't know where to go. Their homes have been destroyed. So many people built homes as they would around the world as their egg nest. They are rubble and they've been asked to move again. And they know full well if you're in one of these evacuation zones, they know they have no choice but to run for their lives. They just don't know where to run to.
James, the old adage in journalism is to understand and tell the story is narrow the distance between yourself and the story, but we can't. International journalists are not allowed into Gaza unless on brief embeds, as they call them, with Israeli troops in and out for a few hours. You've been to Khan Yunis, you've seen the area. That's the other area where the IDF are saying that there will be aid if people go that way. What's that like?
I've never seen the devastation of a place like Khan Yunis in my 2 decades with the United Nations. Gavin, Khan Yunis is rubble as far as you can see, and that unfortunately speaks to something. That's not targeted strikes. When you are looking at at 360 degrees of destroyed homes and buildings and apartment blocks. That speaks to the indiscriminate nature with which this war has been fought. That's why two-thirds of all homes in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. So there's nothing to go to in Gaza. Remembering it's not just people need shelter, they need medical support. Now more than ever in Gazans' life do they need medical support. They need nutrition, they need sanitation. Those things have been destroyed. Nasser Hospital was one of the three biggest hospitals in the Gaza Strip. That's in Khan Yunis. That's not operational. Shifa Hospital, of course, is no longer. European Hospital is the largest standing hospital in the Gaza Strip, and it is right on that evacuation zone. So that's tens of thousands of people that will have to be evacuating and all the sick. So again, people are moving to places where they know there is not the medical attention and the simple water and toilet that people expect and need on a daily basis.
You've seen, around the world in the last few days, US protests, that sense of frustration, helplessness, that have seen what's this dynamic of young people protesting. I just wonder what toll that's taken on you and your staff just covering this. You've described in graphic detail what you've seen in the course of the past few months and just how that's affecting you.
I think everyone has just fallen time and time again with this hope, be it those who spend time in Gaza like me, those who live in Gaza, for a ceasefire. And a ceasefire gives people a week or two of hope, and they felt that the last few days. Ceasefire gets hostages home. It ends that torment and allows people to flood the Gaza Strip with aid. We're realising those hopes are being literally blown up. So people are exhausted. Gavin, I spoke to a young colleague of mine. She's in her 20s, Palestinians, one of my colleagues in Rafah, her family home where I've been to. Her name is Rawan. I've been to her family home, her mum, her dad, a couple of siblings, a couple of dogs. And they are in that evacuation. They are leaving a regular middle-class, 4-bedroom, 2-story house. They're going to the middle area. It's called Deribala, where rivers of sewage are running through that, such as the devastation. And when I spoke to her, Gavin, even though she knew or she feared this day would come, she was frozen. She said, James, I just don't know where to pack. I cannot think. So it's a great question, because we must remember this is 6 or 7 months for these people going through this relentless bombardment. You lie in Rafah and it's like lying in a coffin with bombardments getting closer and closer. You start to learn, okay, that's about half a mile away, or that's a few hundred meters away. They've done that day in, day out. And now they are moving again. So physically and psychologically, they are spent. They're exhausted.
James, your voice is so important. As a fourth estate, given journalists can't get in there, and what you've seen, what you've witnessed. Thank you so much for talking to us, and we will keep in touch with you in future. Thank you. James Elder from UNICEF.